kind of a reminder of him on Father's Day. And of course, my dad just passed away not that long ago too. But so I'm not sure Shilo's going to be able to make it up here yet today. But we'll share a few things and when to just kind of share what's been going on here in the last year and a half or so, or a couple years since we've been here. So for those, I see some new faces here. So Shilo and I work with an organization called Ethnos 360. Used to be called New Tribes Mission, which is a mission organization that works all around the world in church planting and Bible translation among tribal people groups or ethnic people groups that are unreached. And it's hard to believe, but there's still quite a few of them out there in this world today, even with all the technology that we have come to appreciate and know. It doesn't get to them. You need to have people to actually go. Over 2,000 language groups don't even have one word of the Bible in their language. And here we are in the year 2021. Okay? So, had over 2,000 years of the Great Commission. And thankfully, God's work is still going forward. But keep praying for missionaries. We definitely need people willing to commit to serve God and take the gospel to some of the remotest parts of the earth. We happen to be working in Mexico. Like, Mexico? Everybody goes to Mexico. Everybody's Christian there, right? They're all Catholic? There's actually over 60 languages just in Mexico that are not Spanish. We don't know that. It's kind of hard. It's one of the most ethnically, or linguistically, I should say, diverse countries in the world, and quite a lot of indigenous people groups that live far away from the areas that you're probably familiar with when you've maybe visited Mexico before. And so that's where Ethnos 360 works in Mexico, is up in the Sierra Madre Mountains, some of those remote places where those tribal people groups are. And they've been working there since 1970-something. I think 1973 is when they started working in Mexico, reaching some of the people groups there. Of course, we've only been there since, what has that been? 2016 when we went down there. But this church has been supporting us for a lot longer than that. We started out as missionaries in Venezuela and working there. Our specific role with the mission is to work in the area of education with the missionaries' children. Because you can imagine, if you're working in some of these remote areas, there's not a lot of good choices for your kids' education. And when missionaries have to leave the field, if my statistics are still right, one of the top 3 reasons they give is that something didn't work well with their kids' education in that context. And so we want to be able to support them, encourage them in that very important ministry, and that's why we're happy to be a part of working in the education branch of the mission, making sure that each of those missionaries' children receives the education they need in order to be able to do whatever God has them to do in their life. So that's kind of how we fit into that. Started out in Venezuela. We were there for like 4 years. You may have heard of a guy named Hugo Chavez, who now realizes he's no longer with us, that there really was a God, and he's now met him face to face. So, but anyway, he ended up shutting things down there for us in Venezuela. We had to leave after about 4 years. And then we went and served in Paraguay for about 5 years. And that was kind of cool. My sister's a missionary there with her husband, and we got to be a part of that for 5 years. And then since then, we didn't really plan this originally, but now we're on our 3rd mission field. We're in Mexico, and we're really loving it there. And we wanted to share a little bit about that with you this morning. But I did want to say, first of all, thank you for your prayers, your support over all the years. I know we're probably new to some of you. Other ones, I know we've been around for a while. I recognize those faces. So we're certainly appreciative of this church, and they've been very supportive of our family for a lot of years. So let's see here. We will see if the technology is going to cooperate with us this morning. But I wanted to share a little bit. I know we've all gone through, I got the coronavirus edition here of our presentation. We've all been through the ringer for the last year and a half with this crazy pandemic. And so I wanted to share briefly, how did that affect the ministry that we were involved in Mexico? You'll probably see some things that look familiar to you, some things you probably had to experience here as governments reacted and overreacted in all kind of ways to try to figure out what to do with this crazy pandemic that was affecting us worldwide. And so I'll share a few of those things here. Let me see if I can get the slide clip. Ooh, it's working. Okay, good. All right. It's always nice when the technology cooperates. So I just want to say very briefly, give you a quick little outline here. Some of you guys have been praying for my dad for a number of years. He has passed away last May, a year ago May, I guess now. So, but when the coronavirus pandemic started back in March, at least when it started in the USA, we got out on what we thought was probably the last flight out of Mexico. There's a lot of rumors about them shutting the border down, and we were going to go see my dad later on that year, but with the pandemic hitting, we decided we'll go to Delaware where he was and spend some time with him. We were supposed to be there during the 2 weeks to flatten the curve, remember that? And we ended up being there like 2.5 months, locked down in the state of Delaware. But the cool thing was we got to spend some extra time with my dad and my family, and that was providential. It was kind of cool there. We didn't get to go much of anywhere because we were all kind of locked down back in March 2020. But it did give us an opportunity to spend some extra time with my family and be with my dad in his last months or so of life there. So we're grateful for that opportunity that we had, and we know he's in a place where he's not having to deal with all this nonsense that we have to deal with now. So, but we timed it out just right that we could hit every lockdown just as it started, all right? So we were in the States for the initial lockdown of everybody gets shut down back in March and April, that kind of a thing. And we returned to Mexico, which was rated as one of the worst places to survive the pandemic, partly because they just didn't have the medical infrastructure to deal with things. And initially the government had a very poor response. And officially it was over 250,000 deaths. Unofficially we know it was much higher than that. But it was not a great place to be during the pandemic. We came back in June, right after things just opened up, at least in Delaware. I don't know when things opened up here, maybe sooner because this is Idaho. In Washington, I don't know, but maybe not in Washington, I don't know. So, but anyway, we came back in June, just when the first time they had a church service you could go back to live in the state of Delaware. We got to go to that for like 2 Sundays. Got to June, and little did we know that we were hitting the upswing of the first wave of COVID in Mexico, and we went into lockdown almost immediately after getting there again, and it was a pretty hard lockdown. And that one, and we rode that out for about 6 weeks. It wasn't as long as some other ones. So lockdown number 1 there for about 6 weeks in the summertime, and it was kind of interesting, but we'll move on. I think you're all familiar with how the lockdowns work. And then it started tapering off. Life was looking good. We actually got to start school live and in person in August. All right, so that was like, oh, this is going good. We're in the school ministry, just like every other school. We had like 0 warning when everything got shut down, and we scrambled to try to finish out the 2020 school year. So we had done a bunch of research over the summer saying, okay, if this ever happens again, we want it to go more smoothly than it did the first time. So did some training of teachers and all this kind of stuff and trying to help them understand how to use the technology so that we could weather another lockdown if we had one. But we ended up having that whole first quarter of school wide open. We thought, wow, maybe we just wasted our time, but that's all right. But we didn't, because COVID 2.0 hit the end of October, November, December, and February. That was the hard lockdown. That's when most of the deaths happened in Mexico. And we ended up having to do distance learning with school for about 12 weeks of the school year, which is about a quarter and a half, so about a third of the year we had to be in lockdown. And it was pretty hard lockdown. We couldn't even get together, no more than 10 people, and all that fun stuff you guys have had to deal with too, I'm sure. And that's where we were there, lockdown number 2. But at the very end of the year, things tapered off again, and we were actually able to finish out the school year in person and have a live graduation, which is something we no longer take for granted. So anyway, that's where we ended up. Pretty much the end of the year, we got out in the middle of May, and then came right up here right after that. So that's kind of like the quick overview of how things went. Wanted to show you how that affected the school ministry and different things there with a few pictures. You'll probably recognize a few things you had to deal with here. So we did the whole mask wearing thing. We had to deal with that. The Mexican government made a mandatory law, and so whether you wanted to or not, that was us, all right? We also did the glove thing. Every time you had an event that had food, oh my word, it was complicated. You had to put gloves on, you had to have this, you couldn't touch anything, nobody could have individual portions of everything. It kind of discouraged the getting together for fellowship of things because it was just too complicated to have food. But we did it, all right? So what else happened there? We did in-person learning, like I said. We have small enough class sizes that we could spread out those desks, the magical 6 feet, and we could keep the government happy and have live classes by not even having to wear a mask as long as we were 6 feet apart, which is kind of nice for the kids' sake to not have to be in those masks all day long. But when we had to be closer than 6 feet, masking up again and doing all the science experiments and wiping everything down when we're done, all that fun stuff. So yeah, like I said, you probably had experience too. So we did distance learning for part of the year. Providentially, we had just bought a brand new set of Chromebooks for the school and had just enough for everybody to have one right before we got locked down again, because shortly after that you couldn't get a Chromebook, laptop, or any kind of mobile device for the next 6 months unless you wanted to pay like $5,000 for one or something like that. So we were able to get that kind of a thing, and there's a few pictures of the kids doing something that's probably pretty familiar to anybody who's had kids or grandkids in the pandemic. We had to do the whole social distancing thing. There's our chapel services, but we had just enough room in our auditorium to space everybody out the required amount and still be able to meet and have large group gatherings there, so that was nice. And we even did a drama program. There's Gabe out there on the right over there, outdoors, so we could actually not have to do the whole masking thing, but we had to be distant. They did Fiddler on the Roof on the sports court, all right? Not the greatest backdrops, but hey, we got it done, and it was fun. So, and then there were times we were not so socially distanced, but that's all right. Now, of course, I was the principal of the school, had to try to manage all this, and if you ever had to be in any management position during the pandemic, it's like trying to herd angry cats, trying to get everybody to follow all the protocols and all those things you had to do. But so sometimes they followed the protocols and sometimes they didn't, and I found out later on when I got the picture, but okay, that's fine. So, but they all had fun and nobody got sick, so that was good. But yes, we made it through there. God was working. That's my point here I want to make. A lot of times we think that the pandemic caught God surprised just as much as it caught us by surprise, but it did not, all right? He was working through the pandemic, and not just as much as in spite of the pandemic. And I want to share a few things that he was able to do even in the midst of all this craziness we've all had to experience. We were able to actually, either through distance learning or in-person learning, meet the needs of those missionary children that were there through that. One thing the pandemic showed us is how integral the school ministry is to every other ministry that's on that field, because when it had to shut down, it dominoed, ding, 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 everything else down, because then all the parents who were involved in those various ministries now had to hit the brakes and deal with homeschooling kids and things like that. And so we had one time in the whole school year where we had to have a COVID exposure shut down, and it was the school went down, the Bible school went down, the mission offices went down, the missionary training center went down, all these other ministries that are interconnected to the school because of having their kids in there. It just dominoed everything down, and we began to realize, yeah, this is an integral part of the field of ministry there. That's why we are glad to be a part of that, and it was reiterated there during the pandemic. But beyond the school, well, we were able to have a spiritual emphasis week. Now, we came back in February. Kids had missed out on most of the social events of the year in the middle there, and so we were trying to cram everything in the last 2 months of school. So it made a kind of a frenetic pace for the last couple weeks of school, but we're able to have our spiritual emphasis week with the kids. Both Shilo and I were involved with that. And you guys may have heard of our Operation School Pack that we do. We normally pack up school supplies and almost like the little shoebox type things and give them to, like in these tribal ministries where the missionaries work, there's a lot of kids that can't even afford to buy their school supplies. And so our school raises the funds for that, packs up the school supply kits, ships them out there to the missionaries who are then able to give those out, and it really builds good relationships in the community and helps open the doors for the gospel and the church plant. Well, this year, because all the schools were shut down in Mexico for the most part, all the public schools and stuff, We did like sanitation packs instead of school packs. So we did shampoo and toothpaste and soap and several other things like that. And we were able to pack those things up and do all that and continue that ministry this year. And even outside of the school, there was stuff going on there. It's kind of cool to see. Because our friends Chris and Rachel Thomas are kind of in the back there, but they are missionaries to a tribal group that lives in a town, and they have a children's ministry, and for most of the year they were able to continue on with that, sharing gospel with young people there in Mexico. In that same work, the Tepehuan, the Bible translator on the right, was able to finish up translating the book of Jonah. So some of the things that you can't do because you're busy with other things, when you get locked down in your office, you can get some other things done. And so that was kind of cool. We've got in Guadalajara, we got the translation of the Gospel of John was finished during that time. And in the Nahuatl church, they had over 1,074 verses that got checked, ready to go by the consultant to be able to be printed and put into the scripture. And they were able to actually continue the church ministry there. It's a relatively new church among a tribal group there. So it was kind of a critical time that they were able to continue to meet right after the church was born there. So it was just kind of cool to see all the things that God was doing. And even in the midst of the pandemic, they were actually able to start the process to open up a new tribal work among the Tzetzal in southern Mexico, and that's a Mexican national missionary there, Hugo, who is going to work with his wife and another couple to open up that church plant there. So God is still working in Mexico and other places. You guys have been a part of that through your prayers and support, and we wanted to share that with you so that you would know that the things we do here are not in vain, all right? God is still God. He's still on his throne, and it's kind of cool to see him working in that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there on that part. I wanted to give you, before I share a few thoughts from God's Word, if you had any questions, maybe this is a good enough time as any, we could answer a few questions, and Shilo can answer too, but yes, go ahead in the back.
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
Where exactly in Mexico are you?
Okay, yes, good question. In Chihuahua, Mexico. Looks like Chihuahua if you say it in English, but named after like the little dog. Well, actually, I think the dog's named after the state, but anyway, that's in the northern part of Mexico. It's the desert, dry part, right south of El Paso. So about 4 hours south is where our school is. And it's a big city of about 1 million people or so where we live in there. So, and that's kind of like the main administrative support center for new tribes or ethnos in Mexico. The tribal works where we work are mostly in northern Mexico, but they are opening a few in southern Mexico as well, down closer to Central America. But what's your second question, sorry?
That's for the kids. I want to know what they like best about Mexico.
All right, what do you like best? Good luck getting the teens to say more than a grunt. How about you, Tori? What do you like best? Meeting new friends. She's our social person, in case you can't figure that out. So, boys, yes. The food's pretty good, yeah. Some of the best tacos in the world, for sure, down there in Mexico. Sam's still thinking about it. He'll get back to you later on that one. So, yes, go ahead. Yes, they do. We have Spanish in school just about every year that they're in there. And so Victoria is probably our best speaker because she went to preschool and got totally immersed and now speaks like a little native Mexican. The boys are learning it at our school and they're progressing along as well too. So yes, it does help to be in the country where you can use it so it sticks in your brain a little bit better. Our school though is actually all in English. It's for North American missionary kids, so we do have Spanish classes, but all our classes are taught in English. So, any other questions? So keep that in mind if you know any like retired teachers or teachers nearing retirement who want to do something for a year or so, maybe overseas. We love to have teachers come teach, and you can teach in English, and we even have fully furnished apartments for you to stay in, so you don't have to worry about like trying to get everything set up for a year or something like that. So keep that in mind. We're always looking for teachers. That's a big prayer request. As you can imagine, it's hard enough to get teachers to serve overseas as missionaries. It's even harder in a COVID pandemic when nobody is even thinking about going overseas or can't go overseas because of all the travel restrictions, etc. So God's been good to provide what we need, but we really need some more. If you even know some young teachers, grandkids coming out of college looking for what to do, we love to have a conversation about that too. So
How safe is it down there for you?
that's a good question. If you read or watch the news, doesn't look too safe. Most of the stuff you're going to hear about here happens in the border areas. And I'll put it this way. We live in a dangerous part of the world. There's drug cartel activity. Chihuahua is right on the main transit route of the drugs coming into the United States. So there certainly is drug violence. I believe on average about 10 people every night in the state are killed. But they're not targeting Americans. They're not targeting expats or even civilians. It's really just drug cartel on cartel violence. So if you use common sense, some wisdom, and make wise choices about where you go and don't go, you're usually pretty good. We don't feel danger on a daily basis down there. I just happen to know about it more because one of my side jobs is to monitor the security environment for the other missionaries while I'm down there. Now, all that being said, it's a matter of perspective, because as many murders as we have a night, it's still less than Chicago, Detroit, or St. Louis. All right, so it all depends on what you're used to. Any major city in the world, you're going to have stuff that shouldn't be going on, and yeah, so it's definitely one of the risks we'll assume working overseas or in a place like that. But as of now, security team keeps pretty close tabs on that, and like I said, we generally don't go out to unlit, dark places at nighttime, things like that. Stay in the area, but during the daytime, yeah, it's just like you're living in any other city. We don't feel like a threat to us personally there. We just got to take precautions about where we travel and when we travel. So, but do pray for the missionaries as you think of them there. We are in a major city, well protected there in general. Where the missionaries work out in the Sierras is very remote. It's where the tribal people are. It also happens to be one of the best places to grow drugs. Not that the missionaries are involved in that, but the cartels are out there, and they monitor everything that comes in and out of there. And so there are regular patrols and traffic stops, but they're not the police. And you're getting stopped by the cartels, making sure you're not some rival gang coming in to mess with their crop or whatever. So our missionaries actually have to put those magnetic signs on the side of their vehicles that's well emblazoned about who we are, because we're well known out there for doing humanitarian work and whatnot, and they're not really messed with. But there's always a risk of somebody getting nervous and trigger happy during harvest season, and so it's just a reality of ministering in that kind of environment. So I got time for one more question, and I'll share a few thoughts from God's Word, if anybody had another question or not. Of course, we'll also be here afterwards during the potluck and barbecue over here, so we can answer some questions then too. So, okay, well, I'll go ahead and share a few thoughts from God's Word then. And yeah, you can actually shut that off now, Rick. I won't need that anymore. So let me get my glasses. I said to Trinity, no matter how big I print this, the printers don't work very well and they make it small, so I gotta have glasses to see what's going on. But anyway, this crazy year and a half definitely caught us all by surprise. And it's been, I'm sure you've been through some things here. I know Washington State, from what I understand, is just now coming out from some pretty strict lockdowns and things like that. It's been kind of interesting as we traveled up north, just the different states and how the different rules that you'd come in, it would be different in one state compared to the other. And I'll save you my Idaho joke for later, but anyway. But this pandemic is one that certainly, I think, in the initial stages caught us all by surprise. It wasn't something we were expecting. And I can almost guarantee that at some point in this past year and a half, you've probably been frustrated. Your plans have not worked out the way you wanted. Maybe you've gotten a little bit angry about how things have developed through the whole thing. Some of you may have experienced some anxiety and some fear. There are a lot of unknowns. Some people seem to get the thing and it's like a passing flu and doesn't hardly affect them. Other people get nailed right between the eyes and in the hospital and fighting for their lives. It's like, what in the world? It's a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty. We talked about the Truth Project. I have never lived through a time in my life where it has been so hard to try to identify, even from what used to be reputable sources, what is the truth, all right? Like, what is going on? Are we getting sold a bill of sale, or is there something really going on here? And as we've seen, sometimes the pandemic brought out the best in people. Often the pandemic brought out the worst in people, okay? Because humans don't do well when they're frustrated, angry, and anxious. They start lashing out at a lot of different things. And it's easy to think or to be deceived, I guess you could say, by Satan, that somehow the world's in chaos, God got lost, this got him confused, and he's no longer in control. And what I wanted to share this morning was some reminders that God has been giving me. It's certainly been a high frustration trying to run a school, something as small as a school in the middle of a pandemic. The government regulations are changing every other minute, and you're trying to follow the law, and things are switching, and then they find out something new, so they undo that rule, make a new rule. And it's been, I don't think we ever did a plan A this whole year. It's usually plan F or G or something like that. We tried it 6 or 7 times. If we got to a plan A, it was because we went through A through Z and we were back to A again, and it just happened to be coincidentally like that. But there were some good reminders that I was reading through in Isaiah chapter 46. That's what I'm going to share a little bit this morning. Isaiah 46 verses 8 through 11. And God was just reminding me, hey, I have not changed. I am still in control of this. This pandemic did not catch me by surprise. In fact, I will argue this morning that God is using the pandemic to accomplish his purposes, not trying to figure out what to do to get his purposes to work out in the middle of the pandemic. All right? And sometimes we need to remember that because God hasn't forgotten it. This is what he says in Isaiah chapter 46, verses 8 through 11. He says, "Remember this and stand firm. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. Remember the former things of old. For I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things not yet done. Excuse me. Saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. Calling a bird of prey from the east, or the man of my counsel from a far country. I have spoken, and I will bring it to pass. I have purposed, and I will do it." All right? This is God speaking to Isaiah there.